course, the gains have not been equally shared. This composite picture of the world at night is essentially a map of energy use, and it shows the parts of the world where energy use is so profligate that it's literally lit up like a Christmas tree, and the other parts of the world where energy use is at a much lower level and people live at a much lower level of material comfort. And the Millennium Assessment Report said that inequality has actually worsened in recent years despite this huge increase in the overall material well-being of the human population. 1 billion people still survive on less than $1 a day, and most of them are in rural areas where they're highly dependent on ecosystem services. And inequality has actually increased in the last decade. Despite that huge amount of food that I mentioned, an estimated 850 million people don't have enough to eat, and that number has actually increased in recent years because per capita food production has declined in sub-Saharan Africa. And still more than 1 billion people don't have clean water, twice that number don't have sanitation. And water scarcity now affects between 1 and 2 billion people worldwide. Thunberg's take on the reaction to the call made by the Australian delegation to the UNESCO World Conference on Science that we should see this century as not just a new century but a just new century, as an investment in our own security and well-being as well as our humanitarian duty, is that our leaders shrugged their shoulders when 1,360 scientists said the world was on the brink of disaster and asked for a second opinion. Richard Eckersley has suggested that there are 3 different responses to the analysis of our problem. One is fundamentalism, a retreat to previous certainty and the rule of dogma, whether it's religious dogma or economic dogma, trust free trade or trust lowering of tariffs or trust globalisation. A second response is what he called nihilism, indulge any desires, think and act as if nothing matters, decadence rules, climate's changing, so why not close down the city and have a car race? Just thinking that. The attitude that there's no point travelling steerage if you're hooked on the Titanic, and it seems to me that several people who should know better are effectively taking that approach. And the third approach is activism, that the crisis stimulates new approaches. And I remember my successor at the Commission for the Future, Dr. Peter Elliott of South Australia, drew my attention to the fact that the Chinese translation of our word crisis consists of 2 of their characters. One means emergency, predicament, dilemma, the other means opportunity. And it struck me that that was a very perceptive translation, because a crisis is by definition a time of danger. But the fact that what you've been doing in the past is not working can be a stimulus to try something different, to new thinking and new approaches. Jared Diamond, in his book Collapse, which is subtitled How Societies Choose to Fail or Survive, argues that any society will naturally expand until it reaches ecological limits. And what happens then depends on whether the society blindly sticks to what it's done in the past, which has brought it up against these ecological limits, or whether their social institutions and their collective wisdom allows them to change their approach and to get back into balance. And in that sense, he argues that societies actively choose to fail, as in Easter Island or the Mayan civilization, or choose to survive, as in medieval Japan or other Pacific islands, where they changed their approach and got back into balance. All of the problems that I've mentioned can be resolved, and it's really our cultural values and our social institutions that determine if there's a concerted response. Jared Diamond suggested the most likely future for Australia was what he called a declining standard of living in a steadily deteriorating environment. And when I mentioned that quote at the conference in Sydney last year, the chairman interrupted me and asked the people who lived in Sydney to put their hand up if they thought that was an accurate diagnosis of the situation at the moment. And the majority of people put their hands up, that they believe that they are now seeing a declining standard of living in a deteriorating environment. The signs of hope are that there is new thinking about what we might do, that people are prepared to come and sit on uncomfortable seats and be bashed for an hour about these problems and what we might do about them. And the growing recognition that survival involves not just new practices, but I believe also new values. Paul Raskin, who heads the Telus Institute in Boston, recently argued that the values which have produced our society in the last 100 years are domination of nature, consumerism and individualism. And he said they've been remarkably successful in improving our material standard of living in the last 100 years, but they're now a threat to the survival of our civilization. And he argues that if civilization is going to survive, domination of nature, the approach one of my friends summarised in the phrase "white man speak with forklift truck," resolve any problem by bigger and more powerful technology, needs to be replaced by ecological sensitivity, an awareness of the limits of natural systems and a willingness to live within them. Consumerism, the nature, extraordinary metaphor that is, the individualist stomach. We don't use resources, we consume them. That notion of quality of life being defined by material consumption, he argues, needs to be replaced by quality of life, an emphasis on maximising the quality of the human experience rather than maximising the amount of coal and oil and steel that we process each year. And finally, individualism, the ridiculous notion that we can be self-sufficient individuals on a planet with 6.5 billion other people, needs to be replaced by a recognition that we share a common fate, not just with other Australians, but with all other members of the human family. And climate change is the most obvious example of that. We share a common atmosphere, and our climate is not just affected by our fuel use in Australia, it's also affected by fuel use in Bhutan and fuel use in the United States of America. And unless we rediscover that shared humanity, we don't have much of a future. We're now getting a greener shade of rhetoric, and this slide comes from a presentation by the Premier of one of the other states in our Commonwealth at a conference about the future of the state capital. And it set out their vision for a sustainable city, and it says at the top, sustainability is about living within our means, managing our consumption of resources, balancing environmental, economic and social outcomes. And they have a nice little Venn diagram that shows the environment, the social and the economic as domains of equal importance. That would be a nice model, but what we get more often is what I call the pig-headed model, in which the economy is the main game and society and the environment seen as minor protuberances like the ears on the pig. And that's the sense in which I think poor old John Howard just doesn't get it. I think he genuinely believes that climate change is just another political problem, like hospital queues or the state of the roads, that you throw a bit of money at in an election year and that solves the problem. I think he genuinely believes that as long as the economy is well managed, then nothing else really matters. But it is clear that other things do really matter. Indeed, your Premier was moved to be quoted as saying this on your State Sustainability Roundtable report: the metabolism of the global economy is on a collision course with the metabolism of the planet. And when we reflect on which should take priority, I think really it's no contest. Markets give us some of the things that we want, like food and clothing and water, but overwhelmingly what markets give us in an affluent society like Australia is what Clive Hamilton memorably described as things that we have to be persuaded to use money we don't have, to buy to impress people we don't like. And indeed, Richard Eckersley said that the advertising industry has repackaged the traditional 7 deadly sins, pride, lust, envy, laziness and so on, as the 7 marketing imperatives of the modern world, which are used aggressively to sell you these things that you don't really need. Whereas natural systems give us the things that we absolutely need, like breathable air, drinkable water, the capacity to produce our food, as well as other things that are important, like our sense of cultural identity and spiritual sustenance.